Hello, ninth graders. We're continuing our read of Into the Clouds by Tod Olson. I think we're finding out a little more about the personalities of this particular climbing expedition and the challenges and the frustrations and even the despair, if you will. So we are continuing on. We're going to start at the middle of page 111. And this is when Wisner has realized that the provisions that he planned for are not in the camps. And it's not what he expected. The fog that had blanketed the ice slope during the summit team's near fatal plunge hung over base camp the next day. In the afternoon, Cromwell and Durrance were busy organizing gear for the porters when 4 weary Sherpas appeared out of the mist. They laid down a heavy load of sleeping bags, stoves, and other gear. Then Tindrip told their story. The Sherpas felt terrible about descending from Camp 6 before they made contact with Wisner and Wolf. Tindrip insisted he had gone as high as he dared and heard no sign of life from above. The slopes near Camp 8 had been swept by avalanches, and it was doubtful the summit team had escaped. He knew the porters were coming soon, and the Sahibs would not want to leave valuable gear on the mountain. With no one to advise them, he and the other Sherpas did what they thought was right. They stripped camps 7 and 6 and got down the mountain in time for the porters to haul the gear out. Tindrip's story fueled the worst fears of the base camp party. They had already started to worry about the advance team. After all, Wisner had reached Camp 8 on July 14th, nearly 10 days before. From there, the summit shouldn't have been more than a 3-day round trip. Except for 2 days of storm, K2 had given them perfect climbing weather. As soon as Tindrip finished, Durrance and Cromwell went to the edge of camp and scanned the mountain with binoculars. They could barely see a thing through the fog. The next day, they decided Cromwell would take Kukuli and Dawa up the glacier to look for signs of life on the ridge. Earlier that morning, as Tindrip moved down the mountain with news of their deaths, the 3 climbers at Camp 7 were feeling relieved to be alive. They had sat upright in the darkness for hours, clutching Pasang Lama's sleeping bag to their chest. No one slept for more than minutes at a time. It had been the most miserable night of Fritz Wisner's life. He was about to follow it the worst decision he would ever make. As the sun rose and warmed the air on July 23rd, only 2 of the 3 men in Camp 7, Wisner and Pasang Lama, prepared to descend. Wisner would say later that he was simply going to Camp 6 to find supplies for another summit bid. Wolf wanted to summit with him and insisted on waiting at Camp 7. But could either of them really have believed that the summit of the second highest mountain on earth was still within reach? All 3 men at this point had spent more time above 25,000 feet than anyone thought was possible. And the ordeal on the ice slope the day before had brought them to the brink of exhaustion. In addition to cracking his ribs, Lama had damaged his kidneys. He was peeing blood. Even if Wisner had the strength to keep climbing, was he really going to leave the injured Sherpa to get down the mountain by himself? Wolf may have been in even worse shape than Pasang Lama. He had reached his limit a week before in the deep snow above Camp 8. Since then, he'd been wallowing in the death zone without enough water or food. Could an experienced mountaineer like Wisner have thought he was going to drag Wolf to the summit of K2? Or was there another reason to leave Wolf by himself at 24,700 feet? Wolf could have sensed he was too big a burden and stayed to avoid endangering the others. Wisner might have known he couldn't get Wolf down the mountain without help from below. Whatever ran through the oxygen-deprived brains of the men at Camp 7 by late morning, Wisner and Lama stood at the edge of camp, roped together and ready to descend. They found a box of matches at the camp. Wisner left Wolf with 15 of them and took the rest for himself. As he and Pasang Lama made their way down toward the Black Pyramid, Wisner saw several more matches strewn in the snow. He called back to Wolf, telling him to collect them and dry them out. He might need them. Then Wisner and Pasang Lama descended the slope, and Dudley Wolf disappeared from view. Chapter 10, The Most Beautiful Monument. On July 24th, Cromwell, Kekuli, and Dawa were roaming the glacier below Camp 1, scanning the mountainside for signs of life when two walking skeletons appeared in the distance. The two climbers moved fitfully, falling to their knees on the snow and rocks every few steps. Cromwell hurried toward them until it was clear Wisner and Pasang Lama had made it down the mountain. "Thank God you're alive," Cromwell exclaimed. Wisner glared at him and spit out some vicious words. His voice was hoarse and he could barely stand, much less climb. But no amount of exhaustion could mask his anger. The men stumbled back into base camp, then Wisner exploded. In a raspy whisper, he railed at Cromwell, Durrance, and the Sherpas. Cromwell had been his second in command, and he had put the entire expedition at risk. What could possibly be his excuse for stripping the camps? And why did Tendrip, Sering, and the others ignore the order to bring supplies to the higher camps? He could have Tendrip put in jail for deserting the summit party. Lives were at stake, not to mention the great and noble goal of placing a human being atop the second highest mountain on earth. Thanks to Cromwell, Durrance, and the Sherpas, Dudley Wolfe was alone at nearly 25,000 feet. Wolfe would sue them all when they got back to the United States, Wisner threatened. Cromwell protested weakly. It wasn't easy to make decisions when they had no idea what was happening at the top of the mountain. They had all agreed long ago that the porters would come on July 23rd, and if they wanted to talk about bad decisions, why did Wisner leave Wolfe alone? Wisner couldn't find an answer that made sense, but at this point it didn't matter. Wolfe was high on the mountain, and there was no reason to think he could get down by himself. Something had to be done. But who had the strength to climb 8,000 feet and help a half-dead man to safety? Sheldon and Kramer were long gone. Unless on the mountain, they had left a week early. Useless on the mountain, they had left a week earlier for Srinagar. Cromwell had never been above Camp 4. He was leaving with the porters the next day. Kekuli was still limping around on frostbitten feet. Pasang Lama had broken ribs and battered kidneys. Durrance was ravaged by the altitude whenever he climbed higher than Camp 2. As for Wisner, he seemed to have lost touch with reality. He insisted that all he needed was a couple of days' rest, that he would climb to Camp 8, pick up Wolfe, and make another attempt at the summit. "Maybe the gods will be with me and let me have what is due to me," he wrote. To everyone else at base camp, it was clear that the mountain gods had chewed up Fritz Wisner and spit him out. The first attempt to rescue Dudley Wolfe began the next day, July 25th. Durrance, Dawa, Sankar, and Finsu made it to Camp 4 before Dawa collapsed with chest pains. Durrance limped back with Dawa in tow, leaving Qatar and Finsu with orders to keep climbing. But at base camp, Wisner, Durrance, and Kekuli held a conference. It's not clear exactly how the decision was made, but on July 28th at 6 o'clock a.m., Pasang Kekuli shouldered a sleeping bag and some food and left base camp with Tsuring Nubu. "Good luck for me to have a man like Pasang left," Wisner would write later. "He is dependable and always does what he plans. I could not do it better." On feet, already ravaged by the cold, Kekuli led Sering up 7,000 feet of snow, ice, and rock in a single day, through the loose scree above Camp 2 up to House's chimney, and finally across the snow slopes to the tiny tent platforms of Camp 6. There they found Qatar and Finsu already dug in. Kekuli and Sering reconstructed a battered tent, fell inside, and slept. The next day, Sering stayed behind, sick from the rapid change in altitude the day before. Somehow Kekuli was able to climb. He led Qatar and Finsu up the rock and ice of the Black Pyramid. Around noon, they stood outside Dudley Wolfe's tent at Camp 7. At first, there was no sign of life. When Kekuli pushed the tent flap open, he was met by a horrible, terrible stench. Wolfe lay in his sleeping bag, listless and confused. He hadn't left the tent in days, even to go to the bathroom. His food lay strewn around the tent floor, ruined by his own waste. It had been several days since he'd been able to melt snow for drinking water. "I ran up matches," he said in a hoarse whisper. The Sherpas found a stove and brewed some tea for the hermit of K2. Kekuli handed over a bundle of mail and a note from Wisner, but Wolfe let them drop without reading a word. It was time for Wolfe Sahib to go down, Kekuli said, and the Sherpas were there to help him. His friends were waiting for him at base camp. With help from Qatar and Finsu, Kukuli nudged Wolf out of the soil tent and into the light. Wolf squinted painfully. He staggered around the tent as best he could and then collapsed in the snow. He couldn't climb just this minute. He said he needed a day to get his strength back. If they would come back tomorrow, he would be ready to descend. At that moment, Kukuli must have known that Wolf would never get off the mountain. As Durrance had discovered, climbers did not recover their strength at this altitude. They only got weaker. But what could he do? Sherpas simply did not order their employers around. He could try to persuade Wolf Sahib, but he couldn't make him climb. Before the sun fell too low in the sky, the Sherpas said goodbye to Dudley Wolf. Without sleeping bags, they couldn't stay at Camp 7. They promised to return the next day and disappeared down the slope. We're going to stop there in the middle of page 120, pick up there tomorrow. Thank you so much, ninth graders, and take care of yourselves. Bye.